Welcome to this tutorial about how to use the newly released app Hype2 to build highly interactive HTML5 content that can be used in iBooks Author, on mobile apps, and on your website. Here's what we're going to build in this tutorial. This is an interactive timeline of the history of Chevy Corvettes. We can tap and hold the red dot, or what we'll call the playhead, and swipe it across the screen and scrub the timeline to see all the pictures of the cars. And we can also flick this just a little bit to the left or to the right and have it snap to that place in the timeline. This is remarkably easy to build with the new app Hype2, which is an HTML5 animation app. It's been around as Hype1 for a while, but there are great new features, and many of the new features are going to be incorporated in this tutorial that we're about to show you. Right now, it is on sale until September 10th for $29.99. That's to get the app from the Mac App Store, and then after that it goes up to $49.99. Either price, in my opinion, a great bargain because you can do so much with it. So let's get going. Let's start building our interactive timeline. So we'll go over to Hype, come up to File, New, and we'll adjust the interface here a little bit. And as we do that, we'll tell you that the document area is on the top, the timeline area is on the bottom. And the first thing that we want to do is make this the right size for iBooks Author. And so right here in document size, we'll go down to iBooks standard widescreen 1024 by 650. Click that. That makes our document a little bit bigger, and we'll zoom it out to 75% so we can see what's going on. So now we have our document and we can start dragging things to it. The first thing we want to do is get the first photo in here. So simply drag in the first photo that I've previously sized and bring it in, line it up to the top and into the center. These photos are all the same size, which is really important in a project like this. They're 1000 pixels wide, and that will allow for 12 pixels on each side, and that's how each photo will be displayed. So the next thing that we need to do is bring in the other photos here. So to do that, I'm going to zoom out a little bit to 25%. Go out and find these other photos and bring them in order. And one of the things I want to do is make sure that they're exactly 12 pixels apart. Hype gives me this indication that they're 16 pixels apart. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's okay. I can release here, and we'll use the left arrow key on our keyboard and tap 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4 to move that over so it exactly lines up with the edge. We can check that over here in our inspector in the metrics section and make sure that left is lined up to 1024. So now I want to speed this up a little bit to show you just positioning the rest of these elements. I'm going to do the same thing to position 6 photos here all together and be back with you in a few seconds to talk about the next step. So now we're back. We've got our document over here on the left-hand side, and we've got all of the photos lined up in order, and they all should be at 0 on the top, and we can check that real quick. And they're all 0 on the top, so we know that they're lined up correctly. And now, as you might imagine, what we're going to do is put our cursor to the upper left of all these photos. Click and hold, drag down and to the right until we select all of the photos in the scene here. Let go of our mouse and go up and arrange and group, just like we would do in a lot of other programs. So now we have grouped this entire section of photos and it's ready to be animated. When it comes to animating something in Hype, we are going to go down to the timeline, and you'll notice that all of the photos here have individual layers in our timeline, and the group here is in the top layer. And so we're going to deal just with the group, and we want to do a few things before we start to animate. One is to come down here in the lower right hand corner, and where it says ease in out, we want to change this to linear. This technique that we're showing you on how to make an interactive timeline really depends on the animation being evenly distributed. So linear is the choice. If we went ease in or ease out, that basically means that the start of the animation would start off at a different speed and we wouldn't have even animation, and basically what we're showing you wouldn't work. So very important to change that to linear and then come back over to the timeline. We want to go out to 5 seconds in the timeline. And the reason we're picking 5 seconds is we want 1 second for each move. We've got 6 photos, but we only have 5 moves that we want to make. We want to go to the first photo here, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order. So for easy math and easy animation, we're going to make those 1 second long each, therefore 5 seconds. So we'll come over here and turn on this record button, which records the animation that we're about to do and puts that final position right here at the 5 second mark. So I will click and hold and start dragging to the left here, then hold down the shift key to get the right alignment up at the top. And it kind of gets away from you a little bit if you're not careful. We'll get back over there to that 16 indicator again. We'll let go. Do the same trick with the arrow key, this time the right arrow key, 1, 2, 3, 4, to get it over into the right position. And if we did everything right, we should end up down here in our inspector with the left dimension being a negative 5,048 pixels and the top still being 0. So now we can uncheck or unclick, or click again to unselect, I should say, the record animation button because we're done with this particular animation. We can now preview that animation in a number of ways. For right now, let's just preview it in Google Chrome. And you can see that we have a nice animation, a nice even animation of all the cars, but we don't have any controller yet. So that's what we need to do next. To make this a little bit simpler on ourselves, what we're going to do is actually draw a line that will sort of be a guide for the controller that we will use temporarily here. And we'll zoom back into our main document here. There we go. And we're just going to do this with a rectangle. So we go up here in the upper left, Elements, and select Rectangle. And we'll want to make this rectangle very quickly into a different dimension. So we want to make the width 800. We'll tab over and make the height 5 pixels. So this gives us a very thin line that we will drag down here and put in the bottom right below the picture and position it about so where we can go ahead and see it there, and we'll just leave it there. This is really going to be a guide. You could actually leave it in, but we're going to bring in some other artwork in just a little bit to be the actual timeline. So we've got that in play now. The next thing we have to do is draw a circle. So back up to Elements, we'll go to Ellipse, which creates our circle, and we'll then resize the circle to, well, first let's take off the border of the circle and change the color. So we'll go over here to the background here, and we'll take off we'll turn the border to none. And for color, I'm going to click on this color control. That pops up colors like you might have seen in other Apple programs. I'm just going to click the magnifying glass because I want to go over and get this red right here, and that applies the red to the circle. And now that we've got that taken care of, now we can size it. Apple Human Interface Guidelines say 44 pixels is about the minimal amount, and we want to make that 44 pixels in width. I put it in the left area, which doesn't hurt anything right now, but that was incorrect. I want to do 44 by width and 44 by height, and then drag this down right into here until I get some crosshairs just like that. So I've positioned that now the way that I want it, and it's almost ready to go. So what I want to do next is bring in some art that I've already created, and this is Timeline PNG. I created this in Illustrator, and this just has more of the actual art that we want to use, and we can also align that in the same area. We want to align it to the center and make sure that it is about the same line as what we had there before. And we want to send this to the back. So I'm going to arrange, send to back. That puts our original line up in the front, and I'm just going to select that by clicking on it and then delete that. So now we have the start of the yellow line. You can faintly see the dates. We're going to take care of that with a background in a second, but we wanted to get this position first, so we've got the dates in there and we've got some space in between those dates. And we can actually, let's see, bump this down just a little bit. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4 pixels down. Do the same thing here, 1, 2, 3, 4 pixels down with the arrow key. And now I'm changing my mind. I want this to be almost in the center. So we'll come back up, and that should be pretty close to what we want. Obviously, you can adjust it the way you want it. You can use whatever artwork you want. Okay, so now I think we're pretty much ready to go here. Let me adjust that up one more. And we're ready to go. So what we want to do is also animate this red dot, because after all, the animated red dot has to move across this part of the timeline. To do that, we're going to actually create another timeline. Well, how do we do that? We go over to the inspector under Scene, and under the animation timelines, we're going to go down here to the plus sign. That gives us a new timeline, and we're going to make that playhead timeline. You can call this whatever you want. It's good to use logical names, of course. Now we've created that timeline, but how do we edit it? Where is it? It's actually over here. If we go to the left side of the interface, click here, and it's now listed in the drop-down menu. We go to Playhead Timeline, and the timeline now exists totally blank. We've got everything still listed, but there's no animation here because this is a separate independent timeline. So what we want to do is highlight this now, and we're just going to animate that circle. Once again, we will go down and make sure that we're set to linear, which we are. Once again, we will go over and turn on the record button, put our playhead within hype down here to 5 seconds exactly. You can check over here with the digital readout. And we want to then start moving the dot. Hold down the shift key to get it exactly right, and come down here where we're pretty much lined up with the end of the yellow line here. And so we're going to say it's right about there. And release, and turn off the record button. If we move the playhead now across this way, you can see that we've got an animation going that way, and our red dot is animated. So the next thing that we want to do, we want this red dot to not only control the position of the red dot when we tap and swipe with our finger, but also to position and control this timeline. Now this would take an awful lot of programming if you were doing it by yourself without the use of hype. But with hype, it's really, really easy. So what we want to do, with the playhead timeline still selected, with our record off, we want to go back, and let's put this in the very first frame. We're going to highlight the circle by clicking on it, then come over to our action settings, and down here on drag, click the plus sign, and our action is going to be control timeline, horizontally, playhead timeline. We can also stack actions together. So on that same drag, we also want hype to control the timeline of, guess what? The main timeline. So we've got both timelines controlled at the same time, and we're ready to go. That's how easy it is to connect the timelines. If we preview that now, you can see that we've got the regular animation going again, but if we come down here to the red dot and we start playing around with the red dot, it is now moving the timeline, which is great. But you might notice when we release the dot, let go of the mouse, or bring our finger up if we were previewing this on our iPad, which I'll get into a little bit later, it just goes off by itself. So that's because the timeline is going to play unless we tell it to stop. And we can tell it to stop by using timeline actions. So I'm going to switch back to the main timeline. Let's put in some timeline actions. The first thing we want to do is bring up the timeline actions layer by clicking here, going down to show timeline actions. That brings up this layer that will be used for the timeline actions to pause the dot and the photos in the place that we want. Now the way we set this up, if we go to exactly 1 second, this picture is perfectly positioned, and that's what we want. So we want timeline pause actions at 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we don't need one at 5 because the timeline will stop by itself there. So to do this, we just want to go ahead and click on timeline action, and it's going to be pause timeline, and now we have that action here. And you can actually copy these, so I'm going to Command C, copy that, bring it out to 1 second, Command V, bring it out to 2 seconds, Command V, bring it out to 3 seconds, Command V, bring it out to 4 seconds, Command V. So now I've got stop actions in the main timeline, and guess what? I want to do the same thing in the playhead timeline. So in timeline actions, we don't want to paste this here because we want a new one to reflect that we want to pause this timeline, which is different. This is the playhead timeline. And once we do one of those, we can do the same thing where we can copy that, come on out to 1 second, Command V, come on out to 2 seconds, Command V, come on out to 3 seconds, Command V, come on out to 4 seconds. Sounding like a broken record here, you know the command, Command V, to put that into place. Now, if we go ahead and preview this, we're going to see that nothing is happening with our pictures because it's paused. Nothing is happening with the timeline because it's paused. But if we click and hold and start dragging this, we now are controlling the timeline, and if we let go, it snaps to the nearest available position. That's what we want, and that's how easy it was to build. So now we have just a few things to add to this to make it ready to go for the iPad, and really the only thing that we have to add is to go back to the main timeline, bring our hype playhead all the way back over to 0. We want to add the background, which is another element, which is going to be a rectangle, and this rectangle we can make as large as the document itself. We're just going to cover this up temporarily, come over here and just take off the border, make the border none, change the color to something dark like that, and then go into our metrics and make sure that this is 1024. Lost a few pixels with the lines going away. So 1024 by 650, 0 and 0, then come up, arrange, send to the back, and now we've got our timeline with the dates much more visible, a little more elegant with the gray background. So now we can preview this as well on our iPad, and the way that we can do that is by using Hype's free iPad application, and this is really cool. We can actually do this at any point during the process. To show you that, we'll switch over to my iPad, and I've got this projected on my computer screen so you can see it. And I'm just going to, on my iPad, come over to Hype Reflect. I'm going to start Hype Reflect, and it's going to give me instructions. And as long as my iPad and my computer are on the same Wi-Fi network, that's all I have to do. So now if I go back to Hype, I can come up here and preview. Larry Meyer's iPad is listed because we're on the same Wi-Fi network, and I'll go back over to Reflection and show you that here indeed it is previewing on my iPad, and I can use my finger now on my iPad and preview it in the same way, which is absolutely great. So now we have a completed Hype project, and it's time to export. And Hype gives us several export options. Under File, Export as HTML5. We can export as a folder, which we could then use in a mobile app or a website. And for iBooks Author, this has always been one of the great features of Hype, is to export as an iBooks Author widget. So that's what we want to do, is simply export this, and this is going to be timeline widget demo, and we'll just save it to the desktop. Hype does its work in the background, and in a few seconds up here at the right, we have a completed timeline widget demo. So putting this in iBooks Author is also very easy. We just go over to iBooks Author, and I'm going to do a file new from template chooser. I'm going to pick the Earth Science template. I am not going to build an entire book here. I'm just going to show you how you put this in, which is remarkably easy. I'll come down here to Add Pages, and I'm going to use a default page. I am going to go ahead and then drag my widget from the desktop right onto the page. And it's just that easy. So now I have the widget positioned, and I can resize this. I can hold down the Shift key as I go to make this a little bit bigger. I can also use these selectors to position it exactly how I want. And we'll say that this is going to be car history and Corvette images from the last 50 years. Of course, if you were doing this, you'd want to make sure that you have rights to the photos. I'm just using these courtesy of GM off the web. I don't have rights to these photos, so don't try to use this and sell it to anyone without permission of GM, of course. So I'll put that in here just so we have that in there as well. So now all I have to do is connect my iPad to my computer by USB, and all I have to do is go ahead and hit preview, and I will go back over to Reflection here, and it's going to tell me that I need to be in iBooks, which I can do here very easily right here. Tap on iBooks, and here comes my preview. It opens on the iPad. Now on the iPad I can tap the image, it brings up the widget full, and I can then use the widget just like we have planned to use it all along, with the playhead working just like we wanted it to. So this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, I think, for Hype 2. It's a great tool. Makes it very easy to do HTML5 animations. In particular, something like this was not available in iBooks Author very easily before. It is now, so hats off to the makers of Hype 2, and we'll look forward to doing some more work with this and more tutorials down the line. But for now, that's it. That's this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon.